Hello, everyone, and welcome to Delightful Dissent. It's episode 69 today, and I'm with Dr. Emma Langman, who's a change optician. So thank you very much for joining us on the show, Emma.
My pleasure.
Yeah, really good to have you here. And firstly, I want to say, if anyone's been paying attention and this episode is slightly out of order, so if you caught the episode 70 earlier in the week, don't worry, you haven't kind of fallen into a rift in the space-time continuum. This is just we had to rearrange things a little bit, so not to worry. Hopefully, yeah. And I really, this is such a big topic. I think, particularly like work and personally now, particularly when we have so many metrics we can use, like smartwatches and smartphone, like so much you can kind of measure and quantify, and there's so much kind of pressure to do it, and I think it's a really important thing to explore and find out whether actually it's the right thing to do and whether we should be doing it and what our relationship with it is. So yeah, really looking forward to getting into this one. But if you happen to be new to Delightful Dissent, it's a shared exploration of an idea that people kind of take for granted or don't really think about in quite the detail that perhaps it would be helpful to. And it's an idea that came up from my work with people taking really different pioneering approaches to big complex problems. And absolutely, Emma is one of those people. And I found that when we do this work, we kind of find these hidden barriers in these implicit assumptions and these deeper assumptions. So I wanted to challenge some of those. And I hope that means that the show will give you some specific ideas that can help you in your personal and professional lives. But perhaps more importantly, I hope it gives you some ideas about how you can go out there and challenge assumptions yourself. Because I'd really like this to be just a normal part of stuff that people did all the time, and it was just a normal thing. And the show is Delightful Dissent because it's not just about kind of changing other people's minds, proving ourselves right at everyone else's expense. It's about exploring and having fun and kind of sharing ideas instead. And the show is genuinely live, so please do bear with us if there are any technical issues. And please be warned that there's this possibility there may be strong language, and there may also be difficult topics that we might discuss. I think given the area that we're speaking about today, there may be some things around uncertainty and risk, how we approach that, possibly around former gifted children, high ability burnout, and relatedly people pleasing, masking and some of the mental health issues that can arise with that, and possibly around grief and how we work with kind of loss and change. So just so you're aware. There really aren't any perfect answers here. It's absolutely about asking questions. If you're watching live, then please do ask questions in the chat and we can bring them into this conversation. If you're listening to or watching the recording, then we'll be sharing information about how you can get in touch with us at the end, as well as that being in the show notes. So, yeah. So I think we first met on actually, it was in the comments of a post on social media.
Yep.
We were just chatting, and we kind of found out we had all these coincidences and shared interests, and so we've had a fair few conversations since. But I really wanted to get you on the show. I particularly, really, that your ability to look at stuff from multiple perspectives and to explore that, and to, and also sometimes all at once.
Mm-hmm.
I thought was really lovely, and so I really wanted to get you on the show partly for that reason as well. But could I ask you to maybe introduce yourself a bit,
Sure.
and tell us a bit about you and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Emma Langman, and my background is civil engineering originally. So I did my first degree in the 90s, and when I got to the end of that, I applied for one job and didn't get it. So I, based on one data point, decided that despite having done really well at school and really well at university, I was unemployable. And thankfully, I was offered the opportunity to stay on at university, and I did a PhD. But while I was doing that, I started working as well as a transport planner, which I really loved. And I've kind of been just fascinated by all sorts of systems and networks ever since then. And probably in my 20s, I was very much around doing things well, and being efficient and lean and process improvement and stuff. And then into my 30s, I got much more interested in doing the right thing and trying to understand what the right thing is, and beginning to cope with the concepts of uncertainty. And I had a great mentor called Nigel Clements, who his answer to most things was, "It depends." And so I sort of really grappling with complexity and the idea that actually there might not always be a right answer or any right answers. And then after that, my 40s has really been quite a lot of introversion and quite hard work, really. Because when I was 41, my ex-husband decided he no longer wanted to be married to me. So a lot of my identity was around, being a wife and mum, as well as working as a working mum, and he was a stay-at-home dad. So trying to restructure that and work out, what does success mean? What's a high-performing life? On the other side of divorce was really difficult. And then through that, I became more and more aware that I am clearly neurodiverse. That started with recognizing ADHD, and then more recently, like, oh, hang on a second. Oh, I'm autistic. Okay, cool. And that's really helped me out quite a lot. So that's my journey of it. And what I do really is help people to try on different lenses in terms of the way that they look at the world, and to even just temporarily, what would it be like if I believed this instead of this? And even things like working with people one-to-one around their careers, where they're sort of like tacit assumption that I need to become more and more senior, and that's what good looks like. And then just saying, well, are you sure? Um, what if that wasn't the case? What if something else was more important? How would that be? So yeah, that's kind of the work that I do. And then I now work really closely with my colleague Cass Potter. We do a lot of work around inclusion and diversity of all forms. So there isn't a hierarchy of inclusion. There isn't a hierarchy of, this form, this people with this need are more important than people with this need or anything. Actually, we need to be working on making life and work well for everyone. So I guess I've integrated that efficiency and effectiveness piece together, all in the context of, well, it does depend, and there are few definable right answers, which if you told me that in my 20s, I would have gone absolutely spare.
I think that moving from that awareness of and helping others move from that awareness
Yeah.
of looking for a right answer, for looking to being that there are a range of good answers.
Yeah.
I find that really comforting, actually.
Yeah.
We don't have to perfect it, and like that isn't even achievable.
No.
So it's not. So yeah, I think it's great. Yeah. So no, it's really, really cool. And are there any particular groups of people that you really like working with? Who do
Yeah.
you
Middle-aged
particularly
straight
like to work?
white blokes.
Wow, that's
Engineers.
that's that's hard mode.
No, it's
um,
absolutely, because I think as soon as you start talking about inclusion and things like that, it's really difficult for those people who have got inherent privilege. Because first of all, to even recognise that part of the reason we've got to where we've got to is due to privilege, is that, I mean, that's a bummer, really, isn't it? Because we kind of all want to believe, oh, it's because I worked hard and I did the right things, and da, da, da. And the concept that actually a lot of what's happened to it in your life is just downright luck, I mean, we said we might be a bit rude on this, but I remember when I was in Q8, I for some reason ended up working in HR, and there was quite a lot of views on what nationalities you should and shouldn't employ. And I said, because I didn't know at the time how my brain works, but I said, well, what difference does it make about which vagina someone came out of? Right? How is that going to impact how they work and who they are and stuff? And it's really interesting, because on the one hand, actually, we are all people and we've all got huge amounts of capability and everything else. But on the other hand, not only do other people hold views about what performance we can achieve, but we do that ourselves. So I had an amazing job a few years ago, working with a multinational, looking after the talent and inclusion type work. And sometimes there were people who the senior leadership could absolutely see their potential and could see that they were high performing and that there was loads they could do. And those people would not engage in the talent development work because they didn't believe it was real. Because they came from, cultures and backgrounds that where that just wasn't something they believed was possible. And so rather than try and fail, they basically convinced themselves that it was tokenism and that the senior leadership didn't really mean it, and that they kind of were almost like they were being set up to be laughed at or something like that. And that was shocking. It was deeply shocking to sit. Particularly, I remember a conversation with one lady from the Philippines, and I said, no, really, genuinely, all of these senior people can see your potential and they want you on the leadership program. And she was like, no, they don't. There must be a catch, kind of thing. And I never managed to persuade her. It's one of the 2 or 3 really sad regrets I have in my life. That was something I couldn't unlock with her.
And it's so two sides of a coin, isn't it? It's both of those things, and I think that that for me, one of the things around this is the idea that hard work on itself isn't necessarily sufficient.
No.
I think that's the big, it's like if you put in a bit of effort and you're very privileged, you get, it's the, and I think this is, if you go to a major public school, you see the laziest kind of like least intelligent of your peers end up running a company
Or countries,
or well, yeah. And so you assume that's the minimum. That's like, okay, well, why if people just put in that much effort, then they would.
Why doesn't everyone just do that?
Why doesn't everyone just do that? Yeah, it's that, and I think it's actually a very hard thing to do, to step outside of that, because by definition, you never have to if you're in that group.
Yeah, and also when you do see that, like I know I've really benefited from the color of my skin and from the type of voice that I have. So I have, I don't know, people never know where I'm from, but and neither do I. So, but I have sort of a middle class kind of accent, and I know that has, at the very least, meant that I haven't had barriers that other people have had. It's just is how it is, and I have been really lucky in terms of being able to get my brain to work in a way that was socially acceptable. I've paid a high price for that, hence the trigger warning around, really high capability children and the burnout that comes from all of that. It's not been an easy journey long term, but I do recognise that I've had a huge amount of privilege at different stages in my life, and that's why I really like working with, I sort of say it quite flippantly, but with straight white middle-aged blokes, because I kind of get that sense of when you realise how lucky you've been, and then it's like, oh hell, what does this mean now? What's my responsibility? Should I just feel guilty? Am I what should I do about this? And actually, it's not a really easy, comfortable place to be. It's an awful lot easier just to pretend you've not noticed it and deny it, and kind of all of that kind of incel type thinking.
Completely. And also, I think we can't necessarily fully blame people for the fact that their life hasn't given them the insight and experiences that ours has.
Yeah.
That's I mean, I say fully, there is some degree of ability, like, choice in there, but equally, it's just not, it's actually quite hard to find, I think. You're not allowed out of the kind of gilded cage to some degree, or so I think it's a really helpful thing, and being between spaces is a big theme for me as well.
Yeah.
And I really like that. But
that's why I turned down the scholarship. I had a scholarship to a private school, and I turned it down. And high school was really hard, like socially really hard for me. And in some ways, if I'd been at a private school where things that were easier for me were more highly valued by people, that might have been easier. But I think I would have become a less capable person in the round.
I think that leads us fairly neatly to the quote. Have you got a quote that you would like to share
Yes, I do. Indeed.
on this topic of that we should measure progress?
Yes, I do.
Um,
Where have I put it? I put it somewhere very safe. Here we go. So the quote comes from Alfie Kohn, who is one of my heroes, who I met through the sort of systems thinking world. Well, I say met, came across his work. I haven't physically met him, but I met a lot of people that have met him. And Alfie wrote a book in the late 90s called Punished by Rewards: The Trouble with Gold Stars, Incentive Plans, A's, Praise, and Other Bribes. And what he says in one of his quotes that I really love is, "Don't let anyone tell you that standardized tests are not accurate, nor not accurate measures. The truth of the matter is they offer a remarkably precise method for gauging the size of the houses near the school where the test was administered." And I think that's so cool. And like, people that I love and value and rate, when they talk about performance, they get that it's an emergent property of a system. Years ago, one of my weird jobs was working weird, as in not on track with my main career, as opposed to intrinsically weird, right? So it wasn't on track with sort of being an engineer. I ended up as a lecturer for a while in the Faculty of Education at the University of Bristol, teaching a program. Well, again, teaching's hot, overstating it probably, but facilitating a program which was an inquiry-based approach to learning, which was really super cool. And through that, we had links with schools who had a real systems approach to understanding how schools perform. And one of the headmasters at one of these was, which is based up in Rochdale, amazing guy. And he had a situation where when Ofsted came in, they said to him, "So where do you think your GCSE results are going to be this year?" Right? And so he went to this Ofsted inspector and said, "Can you just give me a hand? Give me a hand." So she put her hand out, and he picked up a tea bag from the corner of the staff room and a pair of scissors, and he just cut the corner off the tea bag, and he poured the tea leaves into her hands. So you can just imagine, she stood there, nominally really powerful, inspector, and he took those tea leaves and he moved them around in her hand, and he said, "Right, GCSE results. Okay, what do you see?" And it's like, yeah, because there are so many different factors that impact upon that. A person might be going to do their exams and their parents separate. That would have a major impact. Or one of their siblings is ill, or they get glandular fever, or there are some parent loses a job and suddenly they're worrying about money in the family home. There are so many different factors, and that's just the child and their family. Then there's also the teaching staff and what happens for them, and the support staff, and the environment where the exam happens. So maybe you're in the middle of an exam and, I don't know, there's an earthquake alert, which happened in 1987 when I was in music, or different things could happen that completely change it. Or on that day you've got a tummy bug or whatever. So this concept that these things are totally, totally predictable and controllable when they're actually emergent properties of a wider system is really interesting. And what he used to say to children on the exam result day is, the question he would always ask is, "How did we do?" Because their result is the output of that entire system of the school, the family, the child, everything, the health services, everything that leads to that particular result. And I just think that is really, really powerful.
Yeah, that is. I mean, if we treat it as a measure of something, very different, then and I think that shift in perspective of these things tell us about the system. But also that I think you're right. One of the things with this, and we like to bring it into this assumption of measure progress, is how noisy these measurements can be. It's like at maybe a school level or a city level, then you can find things But at an individual level, it's actually not very. It doesn't tell you very much. It's very very weak predictive power,
Yeah.
I think. And this whole, I think one of the things that people, that people with a statsy psychology background worry about that other people don't is power, in the sense of the experimental power to, like, how much, whether or not this thing has an effect, how much of an effect out of all of the other things, how much can it be influenced? So how much, because we kind of make these little neat boxes when we measure, we decide on a model, we need a model. And so it's like, yeah, but what's going on around the model? And to some degree, it's a measure of that. And I think it's funny, actually. I was listening to a really interesting interview with one of the researchers who came up with the implicit bias tests, and listening to the, like how they're valuable in this, and actually have really strong predictive value at population levels. But they're noisy tests as well, like anything. And so they don't actually tell you very much about an individual's propensity to behave in certain ways. And that can be dominated so much by situation again. And the example they gave was, well, did you meet a smiling person on the way to the, or what mood that can massively outweigh any of this stuff. So it does make a really big effect. It's a real thing, but it just tells you very little about the individual.
So one of the things we struggle with as human beings is medium-sized numbers. So many years ago, one of the systems thinking projects I worked on was looking at alcohol misuse in parts of the West Midlands. And that was really fascinating because the group that came together was a multidisciplinary group. So we had, NHS, fire and rescue, local authority, and what the group really struggled with is that we had statistics at the high level about how a population is performing and what the probable outcomes are based on different decisions, like whether people smoke and drink and and yet then everyone kept falling back into the anecdote as well as their own their own individual perspective. And there's this piece, isn't there, around, I think, that the power of the middle is really, really important, and how we elevate lived experience and individual voices and anecdotes to give us some insight into sort of the murky middles, sort of middle-sized problems, complex problems, and also look at the data and the trends at a high level and bring those into that middle space. And when you can do those two things together, when you've got data and decent statistics plus anecdote and lived experience, and you can bring those together, then you've got quite a good chance of dealing with some fairly wicked and complex issues.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the really difficult things about the idea of what we measure, and then what meaning we ascribe to it. And it's also one of the big challenges, I think, when there's certain domains that aren't really directly influenced by being measured.
Okay.
That in the sense of their systemic behavior isn't altered beyond the direct impact of the measurement upon them.
Okay.
Whereas in human systems, the fact that we are aware of the measurement, and that itself has an extra feedback loop. So beyond the kind of conventional observer effects that are a thing, but there's another layer to this that, like, if I see a value changing in a certain direction, that itself changes my behavior.
Yeah.
So there's a possibility of kind of creating feedback loops that don't really reflect the behavior of the system, the widest, what you're actually trying to measure.
Or they do, but not how we necessarily want it to do. So people just get better at learning to cheat.
It's that we, that exams are, the other thing exams are a very good measure of is how good people are at exams.
Yes.
Which is it, and it's like, it's one of the things in terms of, like, a lot of these things are actually incredibly weakly predictive. The only reliable measure of, and I also see this, I think this measuring progress thing actually relates to how we're thinking about business and working on our business. It is this idea of tracking a path that really someone else has tracked. So what we're measuring, and how much do they know that what they measured actually caused this thing? Is like, how much of this is really causal? So are we just measuring how much we're pretending to be something that, with no understanding of the fact that it really generated this? Or how much are we actually measuring real, like the thing that we want to be measuring? And I feel like that's actually, in this, like, how we understand those, how we even come to these metrics is a question we don't ask nearly enough. And we just kind of, it's like a score. It's like it's like a high score. It's like an arcade machine. And it's one of the really interesting things when you look at the one predictive thing about people who were who managed to get rich running a business, is that they have more money now. That's the only thing that's actually a reliable, like, everything else is really weak and is really hard to correlate.
Yeah. I mean, so it's a great book, right? I don't know, those sorts of things are really funny, because actually there's been a book written since called The Halo Effect, which basically says that, Jim Collins, when he wrote those in a very well-meaning way, he was attributing success to staff, but that success then wasn't sustained, right? Even though those things were sort of sustained. And so, I mean, even in my 20s, when I had even less social skills than I do now, I used to ask questions that I thought were really simple and obvious questions to ask that were considered to be quite sort of bordering on offensive. So, in the workplace, people say, well, we need to improve the performance. Okay. The performance of what? Well, performance. What of what? Right? What do we need? Well, we just need to get better. Okay, fine. At what? What do we need to get better at? Well, we need to be more efficient. Okay. At what? And this was like seen like really outrageously rude stuff to be asking these things. And then let's say we get to the point of saying, well, okay, we need to get better at this specific process. Right, okay. How good are we at it now? Well, not very good. How do we know? We don't really know. Right, okay. So how will we know whether we've got better? Oh yeah, we need to measure something sensible. Right, okay. And then by what method will we improve then? Well, we just need to improve. Yeah, okay. By what method? And it's like, this stuff has been around since the 1930s with Deming, and I'm sure before that, that will be in the ancient literature and stuff. So when people talk about performance, and we're going to appraise your performance, my performance in relation to what? In relation to your opinion on me? I mean, what is this?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like a lot of the, there's two separate things here. Firstly, for me, one of the things I've realized again, is I've always asked those kind of questions as well, ever since I was a small child.
Yeah.
And they've been judged as difficult, awkward, pedantic. There's a whole antagonistic, arrogant, just so many different negative judgments.
Yeah.
Whereas actually what happens is if I want to act in an environment, I kind of need to know this stuff. Yeah. So it's like, I don't actually know what you mean when you say that. And I also know if I guess, I'm probably going to guess something different to you, and then you're going to be upset.
Yeah, but the thing is, often they don't know what they mean either, right? And so
I think they know what they...
No, I don't.
They know. So. They don't until they come across it. It's like that thing of I don't know what.
I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that. Yeah. But where I won't know what they. And I think that kind of works if you really share a lot of experience with other people, like a way of experiencing the world with people is like you see it so similarly. You all know the thing when you see it. I don't know the thing when, and I know I will get that wrong if we play that game. And so part of the asking questions is to preempt
Yeah.
me being like, oh, it's that. You mean this thing that I've kind of,
Yeah.
no, we
I
didn't
think
mean
you
that.
give
We
people
meant
too much
we meant something
credit.
completely
I
different.
think you give people too much credit. I think you're not cynical enough. And so, like, if you, I don't know if listeners and people might remember the best value stuff, like 20 years ago or stuff. There was like the best value performance indicators. Okay, cool. And one of those, I mean, my passion is sort of highways and railways and transport systems and people in psychology. But you know, one of the indicators was the average age of lighting columns, right? How is that a performance indicator? So I'd say, right, okay, so if the average age of the lighting columns is 20 years old, or 22 years old, or 30 years old, how does that impact upon the performance of that lighting? Ooh, well, newer lighting is better. Is it? Is it? Doesn't it depend on your lighting stock and how it was constructed and when it was put in and what lamps you've got in there and the efficiency of those lamps and this, so actually my 20-year-old lighting column might be totally fine and your 10-year-old lighting column might have some design flaw that came to light later on. The age of that column doesn't tell us how it's performing, right? And yet people were collecting all of this data and reporting all this data and I'm like, so what's the target? What's a good age for an average age for a lighting column? Well, it depends on type of column, right? Okay, so why are we reporting this nonsense? And how much is that costing us? And is that high performance? To be collecting and reporting data that doesn't help us to get better is a stupid, low performing thing to do.
And particularly when it distorts
Yeah,
behavior, and it's even becomes even more costly when it's not just wasteful, it's kind of actively harmful once it
indeed.
starts distorting
Yeah.
behavior. But I think there's also something in there for me, but in that particular example, and it points to another thing when we're measuring, is like there's actually, I could see, given that there's, you would expect a degree of longevity in, if you just measure that, then the ideal thing is something that lasts like what? Well, it lasts the minimum amount of time possible, actually, the need replacing every day.
Correct, because
That's
then you can bring
that's
it down. Yeah,
that's not
exactly.
good. Are we actually saying that and then we create a design incentive, and I think this is these these shadow incentives. This is one of the really big things around when we're measuring, and for our own progress as well, because like we game the system, I think, quite a lot. And I do wonder whether I don't have the ability to do this particularly. It's why I can't set arbitrary deadlines. I've never been able to set arbitrary deadlines for things, um, because I'm like, well, no, that's just
It's not real.
completely arbitrary.
Yeah.
Why? And I do that to myself too. But I think this idea of like, well, what do we create an incentive, a distortion when we measure one thing and don't understand, like, where does this lead us?
What's the
And
intent?
is that actually the place? Yeah, well,
Exactly.
is
What's
it
the
is
intent?
that place is the place that it leads us where we want to be going?
Yeah, exactly. And I think those are really bigger questions. And when you think that actually only a small percentage of the population is actually good at being strategic, right? Roughly 8% of people are actually naturally good at being strategic. So the rest of us are people like me who live in the future and are like, yay, it should be like this. Come on. And then there are people who kind of like prefer incremental change and they're in the people who can plan and they think that's a strategy, but it's not.
No, that's tactics over a
Correct.
long period of time.
Correct. So there are very few people who are naturally able to be strategic. So when we think about performance indicators and we're not even aware of that, we're not even aware of, are you living in the future, the present, or the past? Right. So if my intent is lighting should be really efficient, affordable, and appropriate for um, you know for the neighbourhood that it's in, then if that's my intent, I need to really state that intent for any of the metrics associated to that to make any sense, right? So unless you're asking why something and how something, there's no point measuring what something.
makes me think there's something really big in this around these proxy measures.
Mm.
And I feel like this actually touches on, both we assume lighting quality directly correlates with the age of the thing without further investigation or
Mm.
further, and actually for me it really relates to the exams thing as well.
Yeah.
Exams are really proxy measures of ability. They're not direct measures of ability. And it's one of the things it's interesting. I was at a talk on Wednesday night where we were talking about recruitment and making it more neurodivergent accessible,
Mm.
and how there's a very classic like common adaptation for which is theoretically an adaptation for autistic accessibility, which is that you give people the questions you're going to ask ahead of time. um, and what came up was how many jobs, particularly, and this was in the context of IT, how many jobs are you actually going to be doing where you spontaneously have to come up with a good answer to a question?
Mm-hmm.
That's actually not a skill
No.
that many people need. I mean, maybe if you work in like PR and you're like, standing in front of the audience of the press and someone asks, maybe then, but only then, actually. And even then, quite a lot of that skill is going to be about like preempting and understanding. There's a so you're the chances of you having these completely random questions that are very weak. They're measuring something that's at best weakly associated and with what we actually want to find out. I think there's a really big thing in that, and when we're measuring proxy measures, we need to be really careful about how seriously we take them.
Yeah, definitely. The closer you can get to the skills you're actually going to use in the job, the more that makes sense. I did for a while. I did some support on recruitment for a local charity, and we had to find a new admin person, and there were quite a lot of soft skills with that, and there were also some hard skills. So I prepared very simple assessments of things like their ability to come up with a letter. So we had two case studies. One was somebody had given some money to the charity. Could they write a letter to thank them for that and encourage them to keep giving? And the second was to do with traffic. So there'd been a complaint that there was bad traffic. So that was really quite a good, useful test, because those are the sort of letters and situations that they do have to deal with, and they had unlimited time to think about and write that letter. And Excel skills and basic, like those really basic things. So what was really interesting is we had this two-pronged approach, which was, one, do they seem to have the skills, and two, did we like them when we met them? Essentially. And it was really fascinating because the did we like them when we met them thing was done by the team, not by me, and I did the completely analytical piece. And the relief on people's faces when the candidates that they intuitively liked had also done well in the technical test was really interesting. And we never did have a situation where the candidate that they happened to really want to connect with didn't do well technically, but I don't know how we'd have weighed that up. And it's
Mm.
really interesting. So there's that. The other thing is about data and performance and those types of things, is that most of what we ought to be worrying about is stuff we don't even know about. So whatever your views on Donald Rumsfeld might be, when he said, it's the unknown unknowns that are the problem, that's absolutely right. And sometimes we can be collecting quite a lot of data to give us certainty about something. So when I was doing my research, I was working in the hydroelectric sector, and the question was essentially how risky and what's the lifespan of these physical assets. And that wasn't really the problem. The problem was an issue of knowledge, because so many of the people who were looking after those dams and hydroelectric assets, they knew that they needed to kick the turbine every second Tuesday to keep it going, right? And the issue wasn't to do with the structure and the mechanics and all of that. It was more to do with the fact that those people had really strongly embedded tacit knowledge that wasn't being captured by the wider organisation. That was where the risk was, and it was really strange to me that wasn't quite visible to everybody else. So you're busy having a nice finite elements model analysis of your dam, but not realising that actually, Joe and Ken or whoever that are looking after the turbines are really a critical part of that system. Yeah, it was confusing to me that wasn't really visible when it seems so obvious.
Yeah, and it feels like there's something really interesting for me related to this, and my own experience of the different perspective I hold on the world, which I attribute significantly to being neurodivergent.
Yeah.
And how actually where it's interfered with the model, it's often not been welcome.
Yeah.
It's like if I point out something that that means that the things that we are measuring has we kind of have to attend to something else, and therefore let the things we are measuring drop in some way, is that is a deeply unwelcome thing in a lot of circumstances. Even though, and I think it relates to that, the need, to some degree, the need, but also the valuing of gaming, effectively just we put the metrics above what we're actually doing. And that feels like a really similar, you've got the people on the ground who know this thing, is like, and it's not captured in any measurement, so it isn't relevant. And one of the things I've really noticed is the one of the models I've always used is no more than 70% commitment to like, as an engineer, you don't, like, systems become more inefficient when when you spec over 70% commitment, which is for a lot of non-engineers, that's a strange thing to say, right? Like, they're like, why we surely 100%, right? I've so many people I've worked with who are like non-technical, non-engineering people who are like, no, it's like, but the fact that you're aware that some slack in the system actually helps the efficiency of the system, because it accounts for the bits that you didn't account for to some degree.
Exactly.
Is
it can absorb the variety, and exactly. We had a similar conversation around humans with a client recently when we said they should do the biodecks, that the Ultranauts created the biodecks. And that's about, what time of work day do you work really well and all of that kind of stuff. And the senior person originally said, well, people just need to be working all of their working hours. And I was like, well, but they're not going to. And this person, now that they've understood how the biodex works and seen the impact of, oh, look, if people actually work at times that work really well for their biorhythms, they do better than if they don't. They're now completely sort of evangelical about that approach, and that's really important. I think, coming back to your question about the pushback when you ask questions around the metrics and what's being measured, is that we need to understand, and again, this is something that I can remember being in tears about this, absolutely in tears about this, that when we model something, we are not modeling reality. We are modeling our view of what reality is. And this used to really distress me, because I was like, but if you do like a 1 in 100 scale or a 1 in 1,000 scale of model of a building, then that's, it's right. That is the building, just smaller. And it took me such a long time to realize that you can't do that. Like, if I make a brick that's a 1/1000th of the size of a real brick, within that, like, the structure within that brick is not going to be 1/1000th of the size, and that really distressed me. It was really upsetting. So I think actually the thing when we question the metrics and stuff is that actually what we might think we're doing is questioning the model, but what we're really doing is questioning people's view of the world. And that's why the optician thing, the change optician thing, is really important, because I'm not telling you that the way that you see the world is wrong. What I'm saying is that you have an opportunity to try looking at it through some other lenses and see how it seems to you then, and that that's okay and that's a safe thing to do. And especially given, we're talking about performance in school and education, the research from Ruth Deacon Crick at the University of Bristol basically shows that your critical curiosity declines, in particular between the end of primary school and the start of high school, because at primary school, if you think about it, the languages we teach the children. When you get to high school, people don't teach children, they teach subjects. So what are you? I'm a primary school teacher. What are you? I'm a maths teacher, right? And so what we're then thinking about is, how do we teach the subject rather than how do we teach the child, and what kind of results are we going to get, and all of that kind of stuff. And if you take that kind of like subject knowledge focus, rather than actually teaching people to learn, learning to learn, got a problem. And most of the work that Cass and Ed and the rest of the team, a lot of the work that we do is teaching people to unlearn how to not learn and go back to learn. Because small kids, I mean, it's such a cliche, isn't it? Children are sponges, blah, 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 blah. But they are, and they ask questions, and they are curious, and they do put their fingers into things they shouldn't put their fingers into because it's not safe, because they don't know better. So they're exploring and learning, and then we basically say to them, no, you don't do that. And again, I remember being really furious. I have quite big feelings. I remember being furious a few years ago. I was teaching on an engineering doctorate program, and at NGD level, somebody was basically asking me, well, will this be? Do I need to know this to get my NGD? And I'm like, what? What? No, when you've got people at university level saying, will this be on the test? Then we're really in trouble. And it's not about teaching knowledge and content and maths to 18. It's about understanding that actually, if we're going to keep up with artificial intelligence, which isn't intelligence, but that's a whole other conversation, if we're going to keep up with that and all of that kind of stuff, then actually we need to be curious, and we need to have critical thinking, and we need to do all of those things. And the other thing that frightens me, and it goes back to this sort of high achieving, gifted child or whatever, is that actually kids who do well in the school system have lower resilience generally, as measured by Ruth and her colleagues, than kids who do less well in the school system. And that's really scary. So I can remember the first time I got something wrong at work, and I was absolutely petrified. I mean, I really thought, I was going to lose my job. And my boss was a really cool sort of person, and he was just like, oh, I should have given you more accurate explanation of what I wanted. Sorry, I should have been clearer. And I don't know whether what his neurotype is, but he from then on made sure I really understood what I was being asked to do, which made me feel really safe and made me much more productive. But actually, again, there's quite a lot of fear there when you think about these high achieving people who've had A's all the way through, then they go to work and they make a mistake, and this is high stakes now, because it's not just about my income, it's about my identity as somebody who's good and does well. And then people start overworking or turn to addiction. So my addiction is working too much, genuinely is, and but other people turn to gambling or alcohol or whatever to try and deal with that. And I think it's just really tragic that we're investing all of this money, across the world into teaching people to not be resilient and to not be curious, and
Yeah, I really like you make that relationship between curiosity and resilience, because I think, for me, one of the really big challenges with all of this is for me, I hit the inflection point at university, partly because I didn't choose a terribly good course, because I actually hadn't ever really been introduced to the idea that I could do something that I hadn't, the idea of trying a subject, learning a subject that I hadn't kind of gone through all of my schooling to do and been kind of prepared for directly, just wasn't part of the conversation. And that I was already good at, if you see what I mean.
Because you've invested.
Exactly.
Mm.
And so what happened is I kind of cruised along, and then I hit the difficulty. I finally hit the difficulty curve, and the the angle of change was, because the difficulty curve for everyone else went like that. For me, it was like, no difficulty, bang,
Yeah.
straight. So I've experienced it as a
You're obviously
wall.
very bright, because that happened to me at A level. Yeah.
Again, partly practice. I think it was I didn't. And I think there's so many wrapped up things in this for me around. Just got so many directions I want to go. I think this idea of, when we're thinking about these things, and going back to your comment about models, and I love the quote of, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I want to draw the relationship between that and AI for people to think about separately, because I think that's an important comment. But that experience of not being able to develop a set of kind of these meta skills, almost these skills around the work, and not being able to play, not being able to, like, never being able to explore the edges. And this is also partly related to the fact that I don't know if, my, like you, my professional background is not, I've not done one thing and continued. I'm not sure the academic boxes were actually available to me. There wasn't a pathway that really would have let me be curious and recover that. And I think one of the really strange things I've found is I'm still kind of slightly resistant to it sometimes, but actually I'm not sure very much of it is mine, in terms of the fact, my own preference. I love exploring and curiosity. I seek things. That's why I do this show. I like finding things out that prove, where I'm like, oh, I was wrong about that. Oh, I've learned something else. Oh, I have to change. That changes. Oh, that's really exciting for me.
Yeah.
Whereas I think I've internalized, or had certainly to a significant degree, other people's fear of doing that. And that, where I did that, where I found something out, and where we had to change the model, where we had to change the way we were thinking about things. I love that. I kind of live for that.
I know.
Whereas, like, I hadn't realized, and again, this is one's own experience, is because I didn't know other people found that scary, I thought it was something else.
Isn't it funny? Like, I haven't met any autistic people yet who don't enjoy playing with ideas and looking at the models and learning new things, and yet we're characterized as finding change difficult. It's really interesting, that. And I think the bit that is hard is the lack of clarity, and the sense that other people know stuff that they're not sharing with me. So, if a senior leader comes and says, look, we're going through a really tough time and we're going to have to change some stuff, we're not exactly sure what that's going to be. For goodness sake, I mean, I do a lot of change work around change. And one of the reasons that I'm really good at that is because I love change and it's really hard. And so it's really important. If you don't tell people that something's changing, they are going to make up their own story. So for goodness sake, if you don't know, tell them you don't know, and then we can trust the person, even if everything else feels uncertain. So communicate, and I find that a lot of people at senior level don't communicate, or they fear communicating if they don't know what the answer is. Quick couple of thoughts. One is, I was lucky when I decided what degree I was going to do. I wasn't sure whether to do engineering with French or psychology with Russian. And my mum just said, "I will toss a coin and you'll know when it lands." And that was so cool. And the same with, like, going to university. I didn't know which university to go to. And she said, well, whichever one you go to, that's where your friends will be, which was a glorious thought. And so that's one thing. And in the end, I did Spanish with it, because the guy who interviewed me said, oh, everyone does French, why don't you do Spanish? And I love a bit of novelty. So I did that, even though I'd not done it before. And then the other word that you used that I thought was really powerful and important is the concept of play. And, people talk about liberating structures and they talk about self-organizing teams and da 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 da. But actually, what we're after is driving out fear. And again, this is Deming, W. Edward Deming's work, driving out fear and joy in work. And joy in work is when work is play. And experimentation and learning and play is different for all of us, right? So like if I play with plasticine, I will definitely start to make little tiny logs to make a wooden house like Laura Ingalls Wilder, because that's, I just find that fascinating, and I like trying to make structures and things out of. That's how I will play, and other people might think, well, that's not very creative, or she always does buildings, but that's what I love to play. That's my, and I still get sensory joy and everything else from it. So I think a core part of this is around, how do I play, not play the system as in, playing the system to achieve the performance indicator, but play within the system to love what I do and to do things that are worth doing. And that's a completely different kind of mindset, I think, of, well, this isn't real. There are very few things where which are life and death. There are a few jobs which are genuinely life and death jobs. At the same time, every job is a life and death job, because you're spending the time before you die doing that job. That is a large part of your life. So it's both not very important at all, generally, and extremely important. And those two things are both true at the same time. And that's what you said earlier. I can hold those things to be true. The work I do is very, very important and very, very serious, because people spend a lot of time at work, and therefore it's important that they enjoy that and get a lot out of it and have mental health and everything else with it. At the same time, actually, if that job doesn't happen, most of the time, most occupations, no one's going to die. And so those things are simultaneously true, and that's something I love to live in that space.
I completely, I think that's a really lovely way of framing it. And I think, when we're measuring specifically around this outcome thing, we can't be playing. And it makes me think, actually, if we want to measure something, we want to measure that we've got space for play. We want to make sure that we're not overcommitted. And even where jobs are life and death, like directly life and death, I think I've known a lot of people who do them who for whom actual play is a significant part, where it's not life and death, but playing with that outside of that context. I know, so like I've known a couple of people who were surgeons and who would compete with each other to sew things, like random things together, and that would be, that's their play in that context, so that when it matters, you've kind of you've built the capability. And I think so. So I think the measurement, the idea of measurement, if it replaces that development and that play, that's not a good long-term.
So I suddenly
strategy.
and I know we're at the end of our time more or less, but I suddenly had a thought around the concept of play as in drama, and having a structure and a script and all of those types of things, but also the importance of rehearsal and of how much fun people, for me, being involved in plays and things like that, the best bit is whether I'm acting or not, the best bit is the day where you're working on the props and trying to make it look real and stuff like that. And actually there are people who performance indicators and playing that game is enjoyable, in the same way that there are people who like to trade stocks and shares. It's so, for me, the performance indicators are both really serious and not serious at all, and I think we just need to be mindful of the impact these things have, and the cost of measurement, and the intended and unintended consequences of those things.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Amazing. Right. So if people want to get in touch with you, I think
Mhm.
you've got your LinkedIn
Yep.
profile, and you also mentioned that you, as well as offering, the consultancy work that you
Yep.
do, there's also some pro bono coaching
Yep.
available. Do you want to mention that briefly?
Yeah, so we have a target to spend at least 10% of our time doing things purely CSR, and that tends to be coaching, but we can also facilitate things and stuff like that. So people who have got a really good cause, small charities and stuff like that, if you've got like a strategy day or a planning day and you could do with having a facilitator in, then that's the sort of thing we love to do as well. So yeah, our work is all around process improvement and people development, and leadership development in particular, and just holding up mirrors to that and saying, "Are you sure? Are you sure this is the impact you want to have? What else might you do?" And for that whole piece to not be about shame and guilt and I'm not very good, but instead to be about playfulness and joy and part of the continual growth and continual improvement that it is to be human.
Lovely. Thank you. And we mentioned the book Punished by Rewards
Yep.
by Alfie Kohn.
Hmm.
Is anything else jump out for you
Yeah,
around this that
definitely
we've spoken about?
get hold of. There's a book by Peter. Peter Scholtes. If you can get hold of it, Peter Scholtes' book on the team handbook, and he's also got stuff about what to do instead of performance appraisals, which is really, really powerful. And if you're not a member yet, join the Deming Alliance if you're in the UK, because it's insanely affordable, and there's a group of people who really understand these things and spend time together, and it's a mixture of sort of academic thinking but also real pragmatic stuff, and a community of people that will look after you and support you. So when you're in your organisation going, I think this is a little bit crazy actually, there is a tribe out there called the Deming Alliance, who's one of many tribes that will help you to explore this experience and thinking in a very safe and fun, playful way.
Give you a space to play with this
Yeah,
kind of thing. I love
absolutely.
that.
Yeah,
And I
sandbox.
think actually I might need to
You should
think
come.
about that myself
Yeah,
because it sounds great.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. Really appreciate this. Really interesting one. I want to carry on. There's a lot of threads to carry on, so I hope everyone out there as well as yeah similarly. But yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I really do. I hope it's been useful to you in the audience and has kind of got you thinking about this, and give maybe inspired you to start playing with some of this as well. And it is your support in the audience that makes this show really, if not possible, it legitimizes my excuse to have these great conversations that I love having. So thank you. But please do share it, rate it, whatever, all of that stuff. It all helps, and it helps other people find it. And if you're interested in finding more episodes as well, you can find upcoming and past episodes on both YouTube and LinkedIn. And also the podcast is available on if you search for Delightful Dissent on your favorite podcast platform. If it's not on your favorite podcast platform, let me know. Yeah. And we're starting to move through the backlog of episodes that has existed on the podcast side for ages, which is really exciting. And we'll be launching the shiny new website probably soon. But so yeah, do check that out. And the next episode, we're going to be talking to Kieran Morris, who is a voice coach and professional musician, and we're going to be talking about the right thing to say. And I think that need to find the right thing is somehow quite closely related to this in a different way, and that like often kind of feel like it does sometimes win out over really expressing myself, even if that wasn't as tidy or as neat as just finding the gift wrapped thing to say. So I think it's a really important thing to talk about. And that is going to be live at 1 p.m. UK time on Thursday, the 4th of May. So I very much hope to see you then. In the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Goodbye.